Clara Thompson stood on the porch of her quaint two-story home in Millbrook, the crisp autumn air nipping at her cheeks. She watched her husband Jack's car disappear around the corner, the familiar ache of separation tugging at her heart. Even after 5 years of marriage, their love remained as vibrant as the golden leaves carpeting their lawn. "Drive safe, honey," she called out, her voice carrying on the breeze. Jack's response floated back, tinged with his characteristic warmth. "Always do, my love. Can't wait for that pot roast tonight." Clara smiled, inhaling deeply. The scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke filled her lungs, a perfect autumn morning. She turned to go inside, her mind already planning the day ahead. There were errands to run, a house to clean, and that pot roast to prepare. Simple tasks, but they formed the comfortable rhythm of her life with Jack. As she moved through their home, Clara's fingers trailed over familiar surfaces, the smooth wooden banister, the soft throw on the couch, the cool marble of the kitchen counter. Each touch evoked memories, lazy Sunday mornings, animated dinner conversations, quiet evenings spent reading side by side. Their home was more than just a structure. It was a testament to the life they'd built together. The day passed in a blur of activity, the hours slipping by unnoticed. Clara was elbow-deep in sudsy dishwater when the phone rang. She dried her hands absently, reaching for the receiver with a smile. Probably Jack, calling to say he was on his way home. But it wasn't Jack's voice that greeted her. Instead, a solemn official tone cut through her contentment like a knife. "Mrs. Thompson? This is Officer Reeves from the Millbrook Police Department. There's been an accident." The world tilted on its axis. Clara gripped the kitchen counter, her knuckles white, as the officer's words washed over her. Multi-car pileup, Jack injured. Hospital. The details blurred together, overshadowed by a single overwhelming thought. Jack was hurt. The drive to the hospital was a nightmare of screeching tires and blaring horns as Clara navigated through traffic, her heart pounding in her ears. The antiseptic smell of the emergency room assaulted her senses as she burst through the doors, her eyes wild and searching. "Jack Thompson," she gasped to the receptionist. "My husband. Where is he?" Time seemed to stretch and contract as she was led through stark white corridors. The squeak of her shoes on the linoleum floor, the beeping of medical equipment, the hushed voices of staff. Every sound grated on her frayed nerves. Finally, a doctor approached. His face was grave, his words clinical and detached. "Mrs. Thompson, your husband has suffered a severe spinal cord injury. We've stabilized him, but—" Clara barely heard the rest. Her world narrowed to a single point. Jack needed her. She steeled herself and nodded, following the doctor into Jack's room. The sight of Jack, pale and still among a tangle of tubes and wires, nearly broke her. But as she approached the bed, his eyes fluttered open, finding hers with unerring accuracy. "Clara," he whispered, his voice rough and scared. "I can't feel my legs." Clara's heart clenched, but she forced a smile, taking his hand in hers. "It's okay, Jack. We're going to get through this together. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, as the gravity of their new reality sank in, Clara made a silent vow. She would be Jack's rock, his caregiver, his everything. Whatever it took, she would help him heal and reclaim their life together. The days that followed were a whirlwind of medical jargon, rehabilitation plans, and gut-wrenching decisions. Their cozy two-story house, once a symbol of their shared dreams, now presented a labyrinth of challenges. Clara threw herself into researching accessibility options, determined to make their home a haven for Jack's recovery. "We'll turn the downstairs study into our bedroom," she explained to Jack one afternoon, her voice filled with forced cheerfulness. "And I found a contractor who can widen the doorways and install ramps." Jack nodded silently, his once vibrant blue eyes now dull with pain and medication. Clara's heart ached at the sight, but she pushed her own sorrow aside. She had to be strong for both of them. As weeks turned into months, Clara's life became an endless cycle of caregiving tasks. She learned to change Jack's catheter, prevent bed sores, and administer his medications with the precision of a trained nurse. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and dreams for the future, now revolved around physical therapy appointments and pain management strategies. Yet, even in the darkest moments, Clara found slivers of hope. The first time Jack smiled again, really smiled, after watching a comedy show they used to enjoy together. The day he managed to sit up in bed without assistance. These small victories became Clara's lifeline, fueling her determination to see Jack recover. The seasons changed, leaves falling and blooming anew, as Clara and Jack's life settled into a new rhythm. What was once unthinkable became their new normal. For 6 long years, Clara devoted herself entirely to Jack's care and recovery, her own needs and desires fading into the background like a half-forgotten dream. Each morning began the same way. Clara would wake at dawn, her body stiff from another night spent in the armchair beside Jack's bed. The soft light filtering through the curtains painted the room in gentle hues, a stark contrast to the harsh reality of their situation. She'd stretch, pushing away the fatigue that seemed to cling to her bones, and start her daily routine. The quiet house came alive with the soft padding of her feet on the carpet, the gentle whir of Jack's specialized bed as she adjusted it, the rustle of sheets as she helped him sit up. "Good morning, sunshine," she'd say, gently rousing Jack. Her voice was always warm, always optimistic, even on the days when her spirit felt as heavy as lead. Jack's response varied. Some days he'd greet her with a smile, his eyes bright with appreciation. "Morning, beautiful," he'd reply, his voice a comforting rumble that reminded Clara of easier times. Other days, particularly after nights plagued by pain or frustration, he'd merely grunt, turning his face away from the new day. Clara learned to take each reaction in stride, her love unwavering. She'd help Jack with his morning routine, bathing, dressing, and transferring him to his wheelchair. Every movement was a delicate dance they had perfected over time, a testament to Clara's dedication and Jack's resilience. "What's on the agenda today?" Jack would ask, as Clara prepared their breakfast, the kitchen filling with the aroma of coffee and toast. "Physical therapy at 10, then maybe we could go to the park if you're feeling up to it," Clara would suggest, always trying to inject a sense of normalcy and joy into their days. The park visits became a cherished ritual. Clara would push Jack's wheelchair along the winding paths, the wheels crunching softly on the gravel. She'd describe the changing scenery, painting pictures with her words, the vibrant colors of the flowers in spring, the lush green canopy in summer, the golden hues of autumn, and the stark beauty of winter. "Remember when we used to jog through here?" Jack mused one autumn afternoon, his voice tinged with melancholy. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Clara squeezed his shoulder gently, her throat tight with emotion. "We're still here together, Jack. That's what matters." But it wasn't always easy to maintain such positivity. There were days when the weight of their situation threatened to crush Clara's spirit. Nights when she'd retreat to the bathroom, turn on the shower to muffle her sobs, and allow herself a few moments of despair. The cool tiles against her back and the warm water on her face grounded her in these moments of weakness. "Why us?" she'd whisper to her reflection, tears streaming down her face. "Why Jack?" Yet every morning, she'd emerge from these moments with renewed determination. She'd splash cold water on her face, square her shoulders, and face another day, another challenge. The toll on Clara was not just emotional, but physical as well. The constant lifting, turning, and maneuvering of Jack's body left her with chronic back pain and fatigue. Her once smooth hands became calloused, her nails short and practical. Dark circles took up permanent residence under her eyes, and streaks of gray appeared in her chestnut hair. Friends and family offered help, their concern evident in their voices and worried glances. But Clara often declined, feeling that no one could care for Jack as well as she could. "You need to take care of yourself too, Clara," her sister Sarah would often say during her visits. Sarah's green eyes, so like Clara's own, would be filled with worry as she watched her sister's tireless efforts. "You can't pour from an empty cup." Clara would nod, acknowledging the truth in Sarah's words, but find it hard to step away even for a moment. Jack had become her world, and the thought of leaving him, even for a short break, filled her with anxiety. Despite the challenges, there were moments of joy that made it all worthwhile. The day Jack managed to move his toes slightly, sending waves of excitement through both of them. The evening they spent looking through old photo albums, laughing at memories of happier times, Jack's hands squeezing Clara's in silent gratitude. "We've been through so much together," Jack said one night, his voice thick with emotion. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast gentle shadows across his face, highlighting the lines of stress and pain that had become a permanent fixture. "I don't know how you do it, Clara. How you stay so strong." Clara smiled, running her fingers through Jack's graying hair. The familiar texture grounded her, reminding her of all they had shared. "Love makes you stronger than you ever thought possible," she replied softly. As the years passed, their life settled into a routine. Clara became an expert in Jack's care, anticipating his needs often before he voiced them. She learned to find joy in small victories, a good day with less pain, a new movement achieved in therapy, a shared laugh over a silly TV show. But beneath the surface, Clara couldn't help but wonder about the future. Would Jack ever fully recover? Would their life ever return to what it once was? These questions lingered in the back of her mind, but she pushed them aside, focusing instead on the present, on the next task, the next day. Little did Clara know that change was on the horizon, a change that would test the very foundations of their love and commitment. It started with a twitch, a small, almost imperceptible movement in Jack's left foot. Clara noticed it one morning as she was helping him with his exercises, her hands supporting his leg as they went through the familiar motions. Her heart raced, but she didn't want to get her hopes up too high. They'd been disappointed too many times before. "Jack," she said cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper, "can you try to move your foot again?" Jack's brow furrowed in concentration, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. The room was silent save for their breathing and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Then, there it was again, a definite, intentional movement. Their eyes met, a spark of hope igniting between them. "I did it," Jack whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Clara, I moved my foot." That small movement marked the beginning of a remarkable turnaround. Over the next few months, Jack's progress accelerated at a pace that astounded even his doctors. Sensation gradually returned to his legs, followed by increased mobility. Each new development was celebrated like a major victory in their household. Clara threw herself into supporting Jack's recovery with renewed vigor. She researched new physical therapy techniques, consulted with specialists, and pushed Jack to work harder than ever before. Their living room became a makeshift gym, filled with exercise equipment and rehab tools. "Come on, honey, just one more step," Clara encouraged, her hands hovering near Jack's waist as he gripped the parallel bars in the physical therapy room. The smell of antiseptic and sweat filled the air, a scent that had become all too familiar over the years. Jack's face was contorted with effort, sweat beading on his forehead and trickling down his temples. "I can't, Clara," he gasped, his arms trembling with exertion. "It's too much." "Yes, you can," Clara insisted gently, her voice firm but loving. "I believe in you. Just one more." And he did it. One step became two, then three. Soon Jack was taking short walks with the aid of a walker, his steps wobbly but determined. The sound of the walker's rubber feet squeaking against the floor became a melody of progress in their home. The atmosphere in their house transformed. Hope, which had been a quietly nurtured ember for so long, now blazed brightly. They dared to dream again, to make plans for a future they had thought lost. The air seemed lighter, filled with possibility, and the promise of better days ahead. "Maybe we can take that trip to the beach next summer," Jack suggested one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset. The sky was ablaze with oranges and pinks, a beautiful backdrop to their renewed optimism. Clara's heart swelled with joy. "I'd love that," she replied, squeezing his hand. The warmth of his skin against hers felt like a lifeline, a connection to the future they were rebuilding together. But as Jack's health improved, Clara found herself grappling with unexpected emotions. She was overjoyed at his progress, of course, but there was also a creeping sense of uncertainty. For 6 years, her entire identity had been wrapped up in being Jack's caregiver. As he needed her less and less in that capacity, she began to question her role. "What if he doesn't need me anymore?" she confided in Sarah during one of their rare sister talks. They were sitting in Clara's kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Clara's hands were wrapped around her mug, seeking comfort in its warmth. Sarah reached across the table, covering Clara's hand with her own. "Oh, Clara, he'll always need you, just in different ways now." And it's okay to focus on yourself a bit too, you know? Clara nodded, but the worry lingered, a constant presence in the back of her mind. She had given so much of herself to Jack's recovery that she wasn't sure who she was outside of that role. Meanwhile, Jack's recovery continued to progress. He graduated from the walker to a cane, and finally, to walking unassisted. The day he climbed the stairs to their bedroom, a room he hadn't seen in 6 years, was a day of celebration and tears. "We did it, Clara," Jack said, pulling her into an embrace at the top of the stairs. His arms were strong around her, a far cry from the frail man he had been just months ago. "We really did it." Clara held him tightly, her emotions a complex mix of joy, relief, and an inexplicable sense of loss. "Yes, we did," she murmured into his chest, inhaling his familiar scent. As Jack's independence grew, he began to express a desire to return to work, to reclaim the life he had lost. Clara supported him, as always, but couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The future, once so certain, now seemed fraught with unknowns. One morning, as she watched Jack dress for a meeting with his old colleagues, Clara was struck by how much had changed. Jack stood tall and confident, looking more like his old self than he had in years. But Clara caught her reflection in the mirror, the tired eyes, the worry lines, the gray hairs she hadn't bothered to color. She realized that while Jack had been on a journey of recovery, she had been standing still, pouring all of herself into his needs. As she helped Jack straighten his tie, a gesture so familiar yet now tinged with a new significance, Clara wondered what the future held for them, now that the roles they had lived for so long were changing. Little did she know, the greatest challenge to their relationship was yet to come. As Jack's recovery progressed, a subtle shift began to occur in their relationship. Clara, accustomed to being needed constantly, found herself with unexpected free time. The house, once filled with the constant bustle of caregiving, now felt strangely quiet. She tried to fill the void by fussing over Jack, but he gently pushed back, asserting his newfound independence. "I can do it myself, Clara," Jack would say, a hint of irritation in his voice as she tried to help him with tasks he could now manage alone. The words, though not unkind, stung Clara more than she cared to admit. Clara retreated, unsure of her place in this new dynamic. She watched as Jack reconnected with old friends and colleagues, his social calendar filling up while she remained at home, uncertain of her own desires after years of putting them aside. The sound of Jack's laughter drifting from his home office during video calls with co-workers became a bittersweet reminder of how much had changed. It was during one of Jack's nights out that Clara first sensed something was amiss. He came home later than usual, a faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his shirt. The scent, floral and light, was so different from Clara's preferred vanilla that it immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. "How was your evening?" Clara asked, trying to keep her voice neutral as she folded laundry on their bed, the familiar task grounding her in the face of her growing unease. Jack's eyes didn't quite meet hers as he replied, "Oh, just drinks with the guys from work. Nothing special." He busied himself with removing his tie, his movements more hurried than usual. But as the weeks passed, these late nights became more frequent. Jack grew distant, often lost in thought, his phone constantly buzzing with messages he was quick to hide from Clara's view. The atmosphere in their home, once warm and comforting, now felt charged with unspoken tensions. One afternoon, as Clara was doing laundry, she found a slip of paper in Jack's pocket. Her heart raced as she unfolded it, revealing a phone number scrawled in elegant handwriting, along with a name: Melissa. Her hands trembled as she stared at the paper, willing it to be something innocent, something explainable. She confronted Jack that evening, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. They stood in their kitchen, the room that had once been the heart of their home now feeling like a battleground. "Who's Melissa, Jack?" The color drained from Jack's face, his expression a mix of guilt and defiance. He stammered, She's just a friend from work, Clara, nothing more." But Clara saw the guilt in his eyes, and in that moment, she knew. The truth hit her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless. The room seemed to spin around her, the familiar sights of their shared life, photos on the fridge, Jack's favorite mug on the counter, suddenly feeling like relics from a different time. Days later, Jack finally confessed. They sat on opposite ends of their couch, the distance between them feeling insurmountable. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said, his voice a mixture of shame and resolve. I've fallen in love with someone else. Melissa understands me in a way you can't anymore." Clara sat there, stunned into silence. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed deafening in the quiet room. Jack continued to speak, words like fresh start and moving out, barely registering through the roar in her ears. "How could you?" she finally whispered, tears streaming down her face. Her hands clutched a throw pillow, needing something to hold on to as her world crumbled around her. "After everything we've been through, after everything I've done for you." Jack's expression was pained but determined. "I'm grateful for everything you've done, Clara, but I need to live my life now, not just survive it. I hope you can understand." But Clara couldn't understand. How could she? She had given 6 years of her life, sacrificed her own dreams and needs, only to be discarded now that Jack no longer needed her constant care. The injustice of it all threatened to overwhelm her. As Jack packed his bags, Clara sat on their bed, the same bed where she had tended to him countless nights, feeling hollow and betrayed. She watched numbly as he walked out the door, his gait strong and sure, no trace left of the man who had once depended on her for everything. The silence in the house was deafening after Jack left. Clara wandered from room to room, touching the things they had shared, remembering the life they had built together. In the kitchen, she found the calendar where she had meticulously tracked Jack's therapy appointments and medication schedules. With a sudden surge of anger, she ripped it from the wall, tears blurring her vision. As night fell, Clara curled up on the couch, clutching a pillow to her chest. The weight of her new reality pressed down on her, suffocating in its intensity. She had lost not just her husband, but her purpose, her identity. In the darkness of their once shared home, Clara allowed herself to break down, her sobs echoing through the empty rooms. The days following Jack's departure blurred together for Clara. She moved through her home like a ghost, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. The house, once filled with the sounds of their shared life, now echoed with an oppressive silence. Friends and family called, their voices filled with concern and anger on her behalf. But Clara found herself unable to engage, letting calls go to voicemail and texts remain unanswered. It was Sarah who finally broke through Clara's fog of despair. She arrived one morning, armed with determination and a box of Clara's favorite pastries. The scent of cinnamon and sugar wafted through the air as Sarah bustled into the house, bringing with her a much-needed burst of energy. "Enough wallowing," Sarah declared, throwing open the curtains to let sunlight stream into the living room. The sudden brightness made Clara squint, both from the light and the metaphorical illumination Sarah brought to her darkness. It's time to remember who Clara is, not just Jack's wife or caregiver, but Clara herself. Clara blinked in the sudden brightness, both literal and metaphorical. "I'm not sure I know who that is anymore," she admitted softly, her voice hoarse from disuse. Sarah sat beside her, taking Clara's hands in her own. The warmth of her sister's touch was comforting, a lifeline to the world outside her grief. "Then let's find out together." That conversation marked the beginning of Clara's journey back to herself. With Sarah's encouragement, she began to rediscover old passions and explore new ones. She dusted off her easel and paints, forgotten in the attic for years, and found solace in the stroke of brush against canvas. The vibrant colors and freedom of expression offered a stark contrast to the clinical precision required in her years of caregiving. Clara also reconnected with old friends, many of whom she had drifted away from during her years of caregiving. She was surprised to find that they welcomed her back with open arms, no judgment for her long absence. The first time she laughed genuinely during a coffee date with her friend Emily, the sound surprised her. It had been so long since she'd felt that lightness. "We always knew you'd come back to us when you were ready," Emily said, her eyes twinkling with warmth. "We're just glad you're here now." As weeks turned into months, Clara found herself smiling more, laughing even. She joined a local book club, rediscovering her love for literature and stimulating discussion. The monthly meetings became a highlight, offering intellectual stimulation and companionship she hadn't realized she'd been missing. She started taking walks in the park where she used to push Jack's wheelchair, but this time, she noticed the beauty around her in a way she hadn't before. The rustle of leaves in the breeze, the laughter of children playing, the vibrant colors of flowers in bloom, all of it seemed more vivid now. as if she were seeing the world through new eyes. One day, while browsing a local community center bulletin board, a flyer caught Clara's eye. It was advertising for volunteers at a rehabilitation center for accident victims. The bold lettering seemed to jump out at her, stirring something deep within. Clara's heart quickened as she read the details, memories of her years caring for Jack flooding back. But this time, instead of pain, she felt a sense of purpose. With some trepidation, she decided to give it a try. To her surprise, she found that her years of experience caring for Jack made her an invaluable asset to the center. More importantly, she discovered a sense of purpose in helping others navigate the challenging journey of recovery. The clinical knowledge she had gained, once a reminder of her pain, now became a tool to empower and support others. "You have a gift," one of the physical therapists told her after observing Clara comforting a distraught patient. The young woman had been struggling with a particularly challenging therapy session, and Clara's gentle encouragement had made all the difference. "Your empathy and understanding, it makes a real difference." These words touched Clara deeply. For so long she had defined her worth by Jack's needs. Now she was learning that her capacity to care was not limited to him. It was a part of who she was, a strength she could share with the world. As Clara's world expanded, she also began to confront the emotions she had suppressed for so long. With the help of a therapist, she worked through her anger and hurt over Jack's betrayal. The weekly sessions were often difficult, forcing her to confront painful truths and long-buried feelings. "It's okay to be angry," her therapist assured her during a particularly emotional session. The office, with its soft lighting and comfortable chairs, had become a safe space for Clara to unravel her complex emotions. "It's okay to grieve for the life you thought you would have, but it's also okay to move forward." Slowly, Clara began to see her experience not just as a loss, but as a journey of growth. She recognized the strength it had taken to care for Jack all those years, and the resilience she had shown in the face of his betrayal. The woman she saw in the mirror each morning was changing, stronger, more confident, with a spark in her eyes that had been missing for years. One evening, as Clara sat on her porch watching the sunset, something she now did for her own enjoyment rather than as a caregiver's break, she realized she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The sky was ablaze with colors, reminding her of the paintings she had recently created. She thought about Jack, and was surprised to find that the sharp pain of betrayal had dulled. In its place was a complex mix of emotions, sadness for what they had lost, gratitude for the good times they had shared, and surprisingly, a sense of freedom. "I'm going to be okay," Clara said aloud, her voice strong and clear in the quiet evening air. The words felt like a promise to herself, a declaration of her resilience and hope for the future. As if in response, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of blooming flowers. Clara closed her eyes, breathing it in deeply. For the first time in a long time, she felt excited about the future, not because of what someone else needed from her, but because of all the possibilities that lay ahead for her to explore. While Clara was embarking on her journey of self-discovery, Jack's life was taking a different turn. The initial excitement of his new relationship with Melissa began to wane as the realities of day-to-day life set in. The glossy veneer of their whirlwind romance started to show cracks, revealing the complexities beneath. At first, everything had seemed perfect. Melissa was vivacious and carefree, introducing Jack to a world of spontaneity he had long forgotten. They went on impromptu road trips, the open highway stretching before them like a promise of adventure. They attended parties where the rooms buzzed with lively conversations and laughter. They lived life at a pace that left Jack breathless but exhilarated. "This is living," Jack would think to himself, pushing away the nagging guilt he felt when he remembered Clara. The memory of her steadfast presence during his darkest days was a shadow he couldn't quite shake. But as weeks turned into months, Jack began to notice the cracks in his new life. Melissa, for all her charm, lacked the depth of understanding that Clara had possessed. She grew impatient with the lingering effects of Jack's injury, the occasional pain, the need for rest after a long day. "Can't you just push through it?" Melissa would say, a hint of frustration in her voice when Jack begged off yet another late-night outing. Her words, though not intentionally cruel, stung with their lack of empathy. Jack found himself missing the quiet evenings he used to spend with Clara, her gentle presence a balm to his soul. He missed the way she could read his moods, anticipating his needs often before he voiced them. The stark contrast between Clara's intuitive care and Melissa's impatience became increasingly apparent. One morning, as Jack struggled with a painful muscle spasm, a remnant of his injury, he called out for Clara out of habit. Melissa's confused face appeared instead, and the stark difference hit Jack like a punch to the gut. The realization of what he had given up washed over him with crushing clarity. "Are you okay?" Melissa asked, her brow furrowed in concern but her body language betraying her discomfort with his vulnerability. "I'm fine," Jack replied, but he wasn't. Not really. The pain in his body was nothing compared to the ache in his heart. As days passed, Jack found himself thinking more and more about Clara. He wondered how she was doing, if she had moved on. The guilt he had suppressed began to surface, gnawing at him with increasing intensity. He found himself staring at old photos on his phone when Melissa wasn't around, his finger hovering over Clara's contact information, never quite finding the courage to reach out. He tried to talk to Melissa about his past, about the accident and the years of recovery, but she always changed the subject, uncomfortable with the weight of his history. Her dismissal of such a significant part of his life left Jack feeling increasingly isolated. "That's all in the past now, Jack," she would say, waving a hand dismissively. "Let's focus on the future." But Jack was beginning to realize that his past wasn't something he could simply leave behind. It was a part of him, shaping who he was in ways he was only now beginning to understand. The strength he had gained through his recovery, the perspective he had gained on life. These were integral parts of his identity that Melissa seemed uninterested in acknowledging. The final straw came during a dinner party with Melissa's friends. As conversation flowed around him, Jack felt increasingly out of place. These people, with their carefree lives and trivial concerns, seemed alien to him. Their laughter felt hollow, their problems inconsequential compared to the challenges he had faced. When one of Melissa's friends made a tactless joke about disability, Jack saw Melissa laugh along, shooting him an apologetic glance. In that moment, he realized how much he had given up in his pursuit of a normal life. The understanding and compassion he had taken for granted with Clara were glaringly absent in his new world. That night, unable to sleep, Jack found himself looking at old photos on his phone. He came across one of Clara, taken during his recovery. She looked tired, her hair messy, but her eyes shone with love and determination as she helped him with his exercises. The image brought a lump to his throat as the full weight of his actions hit him. Clara had stood by him through the darkest period of his life, sacrificing everything to help him recover. She had seen him at his weakest and most vulnerable, and had loved him unconditionally through it all. And how had he repaid her? By leaving her the moment he could stand on his own 2 feet. "What have I done?" Jack whispered into the darkness, his voice choked with regret. The next morning, Jack woke up with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in months. He knew what he had to do. It wouldn't be easy, and he wasn't sure if it would even make a difference. But he owed it to Clara, and to himself, to try. As he packed his bags, ignoring Melissa's tearful protests, Jack felt a mix of trepidation and hope. He was going back to Millbrook, back to the life he had left behind. Whether Clara would forgive him, whether there was any chance of reconciliation, he didn't know. But he knew he had to try. He had to make things right. The familiar streets of Millbrook seemed both unchanged and entirely different to Jack as he drove through town. Autumn leaves crunched under the tires of his rental car, the sound a poignant reminder of the day he'd left for work, never suspecting how drastically his life would change. His heart raced as he approached the house he had once shared with Clara, memories flooding back with each familiar landmark he passed. Jack sat in the car for several minutes, gathering his courage. The house looked the same from the outside, the blue shutters Clara had insisted on, the flower boxes she had lovingly tended. But would anything be the same inside? Would Clara even want to see him? He hesitated before finally gathering the strength to knock on the door. The door opened, and there stood Clara. Jack's breath caught in his throat. She looked different, stronger, more confident, with a spark in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. Her chestnut hair, once always pulled back in a practical ponytail, now fell in soft waves around her face. She stood straighter, her posture reflecting an inner strength that took Jack by surprise. "Jack," Clara said, her voice steady but guarded. What are you doing here? Jack fumbled for words, suddenly feeling every bit as vulnerable as he had during his weakest moments of recovery. Clara, I needed to see you, to talk to you. Can I come in? Clara hesitated for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she stepped aside to let him enter. The house, once so familiar, now felt foreign to Jack. He noticed small changes, new artwork on the walls, rearranged furniture, all signs of Clara's new life without him. They sat in the living room, an awkward silence stretching between them. The ticking of the clock on the mantel seemed unusually loud in the quiet room. Jack's eyes were drawn to a painting on the wall, a vibrant landscape he didn't recognize. Did you paint that? He asked, gesturing to the artwork. Clara nodded. I've taken up painting again, she said, a hint of pride in her voice. Jack felt a pang of regret, realizing how much of Clara's life he had missed. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I made a terrible mistake, Clara, he began. I was selfish and ungrateful. I threw away everything we had, everything you did for me. Clara listened silently, her face unreadable. Jack continued, pouring out his regrets, his realizations, and his hopes for forgiveness. As he spoke, he noticed Clara's expression soften slightly, but her eyes remained cautious. Jack, she said when he finished, I appreciate you coming here and saying these things. But you hurt me deeply. You left me when I had given you everything. Jack nodded, shame washing over him. I know. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know how sorry I am. Clara was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. The truth is, Jack, I've forgiven you already. Not for you, but for myself. I needed to let go of the anger and hurt to move forward. Jack looked at her, surprised. You have? Clara nodded. It wasn't easy, but these past months have taught me a lot about myself. I've rediscovered who I am outside of being your wife and caregiver, and in doing so, I've found peace. As they talked, Jack began to see the full extent of Clara's transformation. She told him about her volunteer work, her rekindled friendships, her new hobbies. With each word, Jack's admiration for her grew, along with his regret for what he had thrown away. I'm happy for you, Clara, Jack said sincerely. You deserve all of this and more. Clara smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. Thank you, Jack. I hope you can find happiness too. As their conversation drew to a close, Jack realized that the reconciliation he had hoped for wasn't possible. Too much had changed. Clara had grown and moved on, and he needed to do the same. I should go, Jack said, standing up. Thank you for listening, Clara, and for everything you did for me. I never deserved you. Clara walked him to the door. As Jack stepped outside, he turned back one last time. I truly am sorry, Clara, and I'm glad you're doing well. Clara nodded. Goodbye, Jack. Take care of yourself. As Jack walked away, he felt a mix of sadness and relief. He had lost something precious, but in coming here, in seeing Clara's strength and grace, he had gained something too: closure, and the motivation to become a better person. In the weeks following Jack's visit, Clara found herself reflecting on their conversation. While she had meant what she said about forgiveness, seeing Jack had stirred up complex emotions. She was proud of how far she'd come, but there was still healing to be done. Clara threw herself into her volunteer work at the rehabilitation center with renewed vigor. Helping others through their recovery journeys became not just a way to give back, but a path to her own healing. The center buzzed with activity, the whir of exercise equipment, the encouraging voices of therapists, the determined grunts of patients pushing through their exercises. Clara moved through it all with purpose, her presence a source of comfort and motivation for those struggling through their recoveries. One afternoon, as she was assisting a young woman learning to walk again, Clara had an epiphany. The determination in the woman's eyes, the way she pushed through pain and frustration, reminded Clara of her own strength. You've got this, Abby, Clara encouraged, supporting the woman as she took shaky steps between parallel bars. One step at a time. As Abby took a trembling step forward, Clara realized she was taking her own steps too. Steps toward a future she was excited about, one she was creating for herself. Meanwhile, Jack was embarking on his own journey of self-improvement. The visit with Clara had been a wake-up call, showing him how much he had lost and how much growing he still needed to do. He sought therapy to work through his feelings of guilt and to understand why he had made the choices he did. In the safe space of his therapist's office, Jack began to unravel the complex emotions that had led to his betrayal of Clara. He reconnected with old friends, making amends for his absence and working to rebuild those relationships. Jack also reached out to his former colleagues at the rehabilitation center, where he and Clara had spent so much time during his recovery. He offered to share his story with current patients, hoping that his experience could provide encouragement and perspective. As Clara and Jack moved forward on their separate paths, they found that life had a way of bringing things full circle. They occasionally crossed paths at the rehabilitation center, their interactions now warm but distant, marked by mutual respect and a shared understanding of their history. One day, as Clara was leaving the center, she saw Jack speaking with a group of patients. She paused, watching as he shared his story with honesty and humility. She felt a sense of pride, not for herself, but for the growth they had both achieved. Jack noticed Clara and gave her a small nod, which she returned with a smile before continuing on her way. In that brief moment, they both recognized how far they had come, not just from the accident that had changed their lives, but from the painful end of their marriage. As Clara walked home that evening, she felt a sense of contentment wash over her. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. She thought about how endings could also be beginnings, how pain could lead to growth, and how the most unexpected turns in life could lead to beautiful destinations. She had loved, lost, and found herself again. And now, with her heart open and her spirit strong, Clara was ready for whatever adventure life had in store for her next. A year had passed since Jack's unexpected visit. Life in Millbrook continued its gentle rhythm, but for Clara, everything had changed. She had recently been offered a full-time position at the rehabilitation center, a role that filled her with purpose and joy. As Clara stood in front of the mirror, preparing for her first day in her new role, she barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Gone was the exhausted caregiver, the betrayed wife. In her place stood a confident, compassionate professional, eyes bright with anticipation for the day ahead. She smoothed down her blouse, a vibrant blue that she would never have worn during her caregiving years. Her hair, now streaked with natural silver that she had decided to embrace, was styled in a chic bob. The woman in the mirror smiled back at her, radiating an inner strength that had been hard-won. Clara thought briefly of Jack. Through the grapevine, she had heard he had moved to a nearby city, continuing his work with patients and becoming an advocate for spinal cord injury survivors. She felt a warmth in her heart, glad that he too had found his path. As Clara left her house, their old house, now truly hers, she paused on the porch. The morning sun warmed her face as she took a deep breath, savoring the scent of blooming flowers in her garden. The flower boxes she had once tended as a distraction from her worries now overflowed with vibrant blooms, a testament to her renewed zest for life. Life had not turned out as she had planned all those years ago when she and Jack had first bought this house. It had been harder, more painful, but also more profound and transformative than she could have ever imagined. Clara stepped off the porch with a spring in her step, her heels clicking confidently on the pathway. She had learned that love could take many forms. Romantic love, yes, but also self-love, and the love she now felt for her work and the people she helped every day. As she drove to the rehabilitation center, Clara felt a sense of excitement for the future. The familiar buildings of Millbrook passed by her window, each one holding memories of her journey. She thought about the patients she would meet today, the lives she might touch, the difference she could make. She pulled into the parking lot of the center, taking a moment to collect herself before heading in. The building, once a place of struggle and uncertainty during Jack's recovery, now represented opportunity and hope. Clara walked through the doors, greeted by the receptionist's warm smile and the encouraging sounds of therapy sessions already in progress. She made her way to her new office, pausing to chat with colleagues and patients alike. As she settled behind her desk, Clara's eyes fell on a small frame she had placed there. It held a quote that had become her mantra. Life's challenges are not supposed to paralyze you. They're supposed to help you discover who you are, With a smile, Clara turned to her computer, ready to start her day. The story of Clara and Jack had ended, but Clara's story? It was just beginning. What did you think of Clara's story? Sad, right? But she had resilience, and that's the most important thing. Please leave a comment with your opinion. 2 buttons will appear next to it. One to subscribe, if you haven't already, and the other to watch other exciting stories. Take your pick. Thanks for watching this far. See you soon.